The country is eagerly awaiting a Supreme Court decision coming this June that could potentially legalize same-sex marriage across the entirety of the United States. Today we got an indication of how the Supreme Court might actually come down. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was with Bloomberg News talking about what might happen if they were to legalize same-sex marriage. Here's that.
I think it's doubtful that it wouldn't be accepted. The change in people's attitudes on that issue has been enormous. In recent years, people have said, this is the way I am. And others looked around, and we discovered it's our next-door neighbor. We're very fond of them. Or it's our child's best friend, or even our child. So I think it would not take a large adjustment. And of course, we shouldn't speak much more about this subject because one way or another, it will be decided before we leave town in June.
And so we will actually know.
Yeah,
thank you.
I don't have my soundboard with me, so I don't have the gavel, but if I did, I'd have pounded it. But I actually already pounded it earlier this week. This thing's done. It's obvious from based on...
When you said you already pounded it earlier this week?
Oh, yeah.
You do seem loose.
Yeah. And it wasn't even a quarter pounder. It was a full pound. So, so it's over. It's over. It's over. She's obviously indicating that the court is going to rule in favor of allowing gay marriage across the country. So that's not a little thing. Okay. That's gigantic!
Well, I feel the need to play the devil's advocate.
Of course, here comes John with the goddamn devil's advocate.
I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is not one of the ones that we were really like up in the air. How is she going to come down? And you could respond by saying that she speaks with them. She knows how they're likely to rule, and that's entirely true. If they don't pull some sort of like last minute change. I mean, there are some people on the Supreme Court that I definitely do not trust, and so I don't know that we should. Not that there's much that we can do about it at this point, but I don't know that we should relax in advance of June. A lot can happen in a few months.
So you think John Roberts and Sam Alito might be punking her? They're like Ashton Kutcher's waiting in the wings. They're like, watch. We're going to say we're going to go pro-gay marriage? Got you, Ruthie!
It's been a few years since the last season. That's not impossible.
Okay.
But anyway, look, it does seem like a good sign.
Obviously, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is not the issue. She's going to vote the right way. It appears that she's indicating that the rest of the court is going to go in that direction. But you just heard the quotes. That's the information we have.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Cenk. I think that's clearly what she's saying. And I imagine that if you're Sam Alito, if you're John Roberts, if you're, of course, Scalia or Thomas, you're thinking, you know what, I'll give him gay marriage. But I'm going to crush the ACA, and I'm never going to roll back Citizens United. But they can have their little gay marriage victory.
Yeah.
Real quick, it's also incredibly interesting that a Supreme Court justice is granting an interview and talking rather openly about a pending case.
Yeah.
I mean,
she probably shouldn't be.
She probably shouldn't be, but her vote on it is clear based on past votes. But it's interesting because you don't know whether this is politicking the court, whether she's doing this interview. She knows that it's going to make news. Does that somehow put pressure on the court?
Yeah.
Is she responding to something that she thinks Alito did? I mean, when the book on this is written in 2048, it'll be interesting to read.
Yeah. Also, she might end up having to recuse herself because, according to this video, she has a gay neighbor, and so she seems biased to me. But anyway, thank you. Sorry. So not everyone is happy about the apparent, I guess, momentum going towards legalized same-sex marriage across the country. You've probably heard the name Roy Moore. That's the Supreme Court justice from Alabama who tried to shut down same-sex marriage, at least in that state. Thankfully, that was actually shot down. Now, he went on the CNN show of Chris Cuomo, someone who we've criticized in the past, but in this video footage that you're about to see, Chris Cuomo stands up for the rule of law, for the secular rule of law, even more importantly, and delivers a pretty epic smackdown to Roy Moore. So let's watch that.
Your Honor, what this comes down to is you didn't have to do this. You've created a basis to do it, but you didn't have to do it.
I had to do this.
You had to do it because it matters to you personally. This is just like the Ten Commandments situation. You were told by the federal courts, remove the Ten Commandments from the public square. You didn't want to, and you wound up losing your job because of it, but on principle, you felt you did the right thing. Isn't that true?
On principle, I did the right thing, but it's not about the Ten Commandments, and it's not about my feelings. It's about the law. And my law, the Alabama law,
you said that then as well, Your Honor.
Administrative officer. I said the chief administrative officer of the judicial system, and I must act when the jurisdiction of the probate courts is interfered with by one lone judge who has no power or authority to tell them how to interpret the federal Constitution.
But this is exactly how discrimination got removed in states like yours. District courts putting through rulings that the states then had to enact.
Nobody's arguing about racial discrimination in this case. This is not about racial discrimination.
It's about discrimination.
It's about sexual preference.
It's about discrimination.
Overcoming an institution which has existed in our state, in our United States, for centuries.
You know, during the Civil Rights Act, it wasn't about racial discrimination. It was about skin pigmentation. That's what people failed to understand.
Yeah, and he gives off a very strong vibe there of, this isn't about racial discrimination. We lost on that one. We accept that now. We're moving on to something else. Like, and look, he's, what, 70 years old? He was around back then. I wonder which side he was on.
Well, the funny thing is, he's not pretending to be on the opposite side. He's saying this is exactly like the Supreme Court rulings that upheld slavery and segregation. He's saying being in favor of gay marriage is like being in favor of slavery.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
you don't understand that?
I don't know. I mean,
Glenn
he lost
Beck
me
did
on
this
that
thing
one.
on a chalkboard. I totally get it now.
And so he thinks he's Martin Luther King Jr. He thinks he's like the voice in the wilderness, and he will, he's going to stand up to the oppressive courts, etc.
Yeah.
What he doesn't realize is he is the oppressive government.
Yeah.
No, he's George Wallace in this story.
Yeah, and he doesn't get it.
No, he's saying segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And he doesn't think he's Martin Luther King, of course. I mean, he may think he's a voice in the wilderness. I think he thinks that he's fighting the good fight, fighting for his people.
Yeah.
But he's just deliberately twisting laws that he knows and decisions that he knows doesn't work in his favor and trying to take ownership of them.
And also,
I mean, that's just old-fashioned propaganda. I'm surprised.
If he believes this, which we know he's a super religious guy, the whole thing about the Ten Commandments and everything, like, why wouldn't he hold this position? I mean, he's a Supreme Court justice in Alabama now. He doesn't have to, he's not running for re-election every couple of years. And this is one of the downsides to the way our courts are set up. And it's one of the reasons that we have such a rigorous system of trying to vet people who might end up on the actual Supreme Court. And I think that some of the requirements we have for them might be ridiculous, but they're designed to stop a man like this from getting on the court. It makes errors. We've got some people on the court right now that I think are unduly influenced by their religious views. But this is exactly what we're trying to stop happening on a national level.
I don't think anybody in this room was alive in 1957 when Dwight Eisenhower sent federal troops into Little Rock, Arkansas to protect the Little Rock Nine, the 9 kids who tried to integrate Central High School in Little Rock. But this is...
Yeah, Brian Williams was there.
Too soon.
This is precisely the same situation. You have a state official thwarting federal authority, claiming states' rights. You know, he's throwing in God. I have no doubt that George Wallace, that Orville Faubus did that in Arkansas in 1957, and then George Wallace did it in Alabama. But it's the exact same thing. Fortunately, it's not as tight a hold, and President Obama, I don't think, needs to send in federal marshals to guarantee that same-sex marriages can proceed in Alabama. They're already doing it.
My favorite argument of his was at some point in the interview, he says, look, they have equal protection, these members of the LGBT community. He's saying that, hey, you know what? They can still get married to straight people.
Yeah.
He's like, they can get married to members of the opposite sex. That's all right. You know, I'm like, I think you're missing the point.